assignment. Oh, all right. So there are some steps to analyzing an assessment task. The first thing that I suggest that you do is to read the assignment as soon as possible. Now, for the most part, you'll get your assessments at the beginning of each block, but some classes, they will give them out to you throughout the block. You have to pass a certain one before you get to the next one. As soon as you get that assessment, you want to read through it. What you'll want to do is that even though it might not make sense to you at the beginning of the block, by reading it in advance as you are learning and going to each individual class, you'll start to put together your answer to that question because you'll already have an understanding of what they're asking you. And at that point, you can take the relevant information from the classes and start applying it to your assignment. I personally believe in doing my assignments little by little. So if I'm sitting in a class and the teacher mentions something that I think is relevant to the assignment, I save it. Another thing is to not jump ahead unless you're very confident. If you are confident, then by all means start early. But legal thinking can often be very different from the way that we think every day. So sometimes a question may seem very straightforward when you read it that first day. And then you realize as you learn more that the information is completely different to your perception of what it is as a layperson. So that's another thing that I would suggest you do is just make sure that your understanding is the legal understanding and not necessarily the plain English meaning of those words. The second part is going to be confirm the type of assignment that you're doing. So there are a few different type of assignments that I've come across. A research essay is a pretty common one that you'll get early on. The lecturer will give you a topic, and then you'll be expected to write on that topic. In some cases, it can be a theory. In other cases, it can be a law. And in some cases, it would be the problem question. A problem question is something that you'll often see as well. Those ones tend to give you a scenario, and then they ask you to do something with that scenario. So it could be to advise a party based on the analysis of the scenario. And you're often required to identify the legal issue and apply the relevant law. We'll go into that a little bit later. There's actually an entire process around that. A legal memo is another one that I've come across. We'll often be given a scenario and you're expected to write as though you are the person's legal person. So you could be an assistant in a law firm, you could be their lawyer, and you're meant to write some advice to them. It's a little bit different and a little less formal than a research essay in terms of how you're writing it, but it still needs to be cited and treated the same way as a research essay. Any questions? Okay, this is another one that I came across is identify the instructions. So you want to read through the questions to find out what you're being asked to do. Nothing hurts more than writing an entire paper that you think is brilliant, only to get feedback that what you've written is entirely irrelevant to what they've asked you to do, because sometimes you'll read not to understand, but just to read. So what you want to do is find all the words in that task that tells you to do something. So are you being asked to analyze, discuss, evaluate, explain, reflect, or something else? And it's also important to know that some things are implied. They don't always tell you what it is that they want you to do. Sometimes they will say, well, how does that theory apply? And in that case, they're asking you to explain how that theory applies. So here are some common direction words. So analyze would be to examine an argument, theory, or process in detail to explain it and interpret it. Argue is to present a case for or against using reasons and evidence to convince the audience. Compare would be to identify both similarities and difference. Discuss would be to look at from several perspectives, giving reasons for and against. Outline, present the essential features, showing main points and subordinate points. And you're not going to be putting any sort of minor details. They're wanting a very high level explanation when it comes down to outline versus where they're asking you to summarize, where they may ask you to be very, very detailed. If you have questions and you're not sure, one of the things that I think that people don't do enough is ask questions. This is one of those things that I have often asked questions about just to make sure that I'm understanding the assignment, because there's times that things are written in a way that are either very, very vague or too wordy and it can be a little bit confusing. So asking the assessor what they mean by certain things is an excellent way of getting clarity. Now, this is the first part that you want to do to start your research, is to identify the key concepts. This will help you narrow down the scope of your research and again, save you time and effort. This is also going to be helpful in an exam. Instead of doing a separate section for exam, what I've decided to do was point out specific things that are useful throughout writing an assessment that can be utilized in an exam, as well as some additional tips for specific to exams. But identifying key concepts is helpful in both the assignment and in the exam. It's even more important in the exam because you have a very small amount of time to answer these questions. So if you narrow down what they're talking about as early as possible, you get to answer as early as possible. So you can do this using content words. Sometimes it's just an overall concept. Now, every field of study has its own specific language, their vocabulary, and some words may have different meanings from everyday usage. As you go through the classes, most of the time you will find those words. So negligence, for example, is not the same negligence as someone just ignoring their kid. So you'll learn that sort of language over time throughout the classes, but I keep a dictionary and a thesaurus throughout class that I write down small notes. And in my notes, I also highlight key concepts and key words and link them to these topics. And then when you research, you want to look for the meanings of and synonyms for those keywords that might be included in relevant articles. So once you get those key concepts down, when you're doing journal article searches, for example, if you know what concept they're wanting you to research, you can then search for books, journal articles, or cases that focus on that particular concept. And the last thing is determine the scope. Now, earlier I mentioned that there's nothing like having a whole entire brilliant paper that you've written only for them to tell you that it's irrelevant. You have a very small amount of words, and often you can tell how deep they want you to go by the amount of words that you have. What you want to do is narrow that scope. They're not asking you to write every word and present every single case that has to do with a particular topic. So you want to see if you can figure out ways to narrow the scope. So if they say focus on something, for example, you want to make sure that you focus on it. It's very easy to get distracted, particularly as cases often link from case to case to case. But if they've asked you to focus on something, focus on it. If they say confine your discussion to, again, confine your discussion to, and refer to 3 examples, again, do as they ask. You don't get extra points for adding extra things in. And that actually leads me to the grading rubric. So every class, they give you this grading rubric that outlines what they're looking for. And you get a set amount of points for each of these points that they're using. So when they're sitting there grading your assessment, they're going through this rubric and saying, okay, did they meet this? Did they meet this? Did they meet that? There's nothing that can go over. You say it's 5 points for AGL. See, they're not going to give you, an extra point because you've done it extra well, or you've color coded something like that. It just doesn't happen. So what you want to do is make sure that you're giving them what they want so that you can maximize your grade. And sometimes it may mean that if there's a time crunch, you may, sacrifice something for something that's more important. And that's where I was saying here, take a note of all the listed criteria, the task expectations. And this is where I was saying, for example, how are the different criteria weighted? All right, any questions about that sort of preparation, understanding the assignment? Nope, okay, perfect. All right, so this section here is actually pretty important. So it's the IRAC method. This you'll find is used a lot with regards to problem solving question. It basically just provides you a structure to answer legal problem questions. I think that it's actually really good to have this because it makes it a little bit easier to answer these questions. You know what they're asking you, and you know how to approach the questions. They are, in my opinion, easier than research essays in some ways. Now, what you want to do is before you use the IRAC method, you need to assess the entire legal problem to discover where IRAC needs to be applied. I'd also like to add that it's also helpful to add or write down the facts that are relevant to have them before you start doing the IRAC method. So if you're given a scenario, go through and pull out as many relevant facts as you need or that are available to you, because it helps you narrow down what the issues are. So the first thing that you'll want to look at is the issue. So you identify the problem by looking at the facts presented to you, and then you'll want to work out what area of law may govern the resolution of the problem. So looking at what you've learned in class can be very helpful at this point. It's very, very rare that a professor is going to deviate from what you've learned in class. So you want to identify the issues of the problem you're trying to answer through a close analysis of the legal problem, work out the broad area of the law, check your textbooks, because the textbooks are really helpful, and they also tend to put things into very concise ways that the cases themselves don't, and then look for the cases. I always tend to suggest going to secondary first and then going to primary sources of law, just to sort of clarify what you need to know secondary, and then you go to the higher levels of law. So for an example, if you wanted to know something about, say, employment law, you can consult the National Workplace Relations. If you want to know about terms for torts, you can look at a legal dictionary. And then you want to state that issue very, very clearly. So this could be in the form of a question. So is this a binding contract? Does this person owe this person a duty of care? All of those things would be the issue. Then you want to identify the rule that applies to that particular issue. So if we're talking about, does this person owe a duty of care? What are the rules around a duty of care? What do you need to establish a duty of care? So you identify the legal principle and the legal rules that apply. Now, the legal rules, they consist of primary sources of law. So that's going to be legislation and case law. But the secondary sources, like legal dictionaries or legal encyclopedias or textbooks, they can be helpful in identifying what the primary source is. We have access to a lot of databases that help you find primary sources of law through secondary sources. So I can show you a few of those if we have time at the end. I think we will. The next part would be application. So it's not just enough to figure out what the issue and the rule is. You have to actually apply it. So this is going to be where you state the evidence that you have and explain how you arrive at your conclusion. So you'll want to use relevant precedent cases like legislation or statements of legal principles to support your answer. And you also want to apply or distinguish the relevant case authorities with consideration of how the facts are similar or different to those in those cases. You should also consider both sides of the dispute and address any sort of counter argument as well, if it's appropriate. And talk about how those counter arguments affect the case that you're presenting. If it's applicable, you can include discussions of cases that are contrary to the conclusion. You can focus on anything that's contentious that might change the conclusion. So, and then you also want to give an indication of the weight of the argument. So how likely is this argument to change it either way? And lastly, the conclusion. So the conclusion would be the answer or your view of the answer to the issue. You aren't really expected, in my experience, to have an answer, because when it comes down to law, there really is usually no right answer. What's important is the process of legal reasoning that leads you to your conclusion. So you want to make sure that you reach a convincing conclusion on all of the legal issues in the factual problem based on a strong support from case law and legislation. If you can support your argument with case law and legislation that's relevant, then you're pretty golden with regards to marks. Now, you do have to come to a conclusion on the evidence, and in some cases that conclusion is that it may or it may not work. Let's go here. So I actually have a discussion example. So I created this one here. So Ayana and Elsa talked about starting a business together and created a plan. Elsa decided to buy some supplies to start. She saw us on sale without consulting Ayana. Ayana says she doesn't have to pay half because there's no contract. What would you guys do using the IRAC method to start? What do you think the issue would be?
How suppliers. No, you can go.
No, that's fine.
I was just going to say how the supplies were bought without consulting the other person.
That could be an issue. Is there any other issues that pop out?
Well, we need to see if that's like a sort of just an oral plan, or it was there was any written agreement, and what else?
That's
You can also like.
Sorry, go ahead.
Probably also whether there is the presence of any contract, because it says that I understood that there wasn't any contract.
Correct. So that was the pinpoint issue that I sort of pulled out. And all of you actually pulled out different points and what would be relevant issues. There's never really one issue in a problem question. There's usually multiple issues. But the one that I wanted to focus on, and the easiest one, is going to be, is there an actual contract? Now, this actually, the different answers that we had actually brings me to the point of scope. This is where sometimes these questions it's really easy to go overboard, where you start overthinking what exactly the issue is going to be, because there are multiple issues in here. And Carly is correct. Buying supplies without having a discussion with your business partner, that could technically be a breach of contract. Whether or not an oral agreement is a contract, again, also an issue that's there. So all of these are actual issues. This is where narrowing the scope down is important, whether or not they should be in your paper. I do not limit myself for my first draft. I write any and everything that I can think of because it may be relevant. And then you'll start to break down what you want to include and what you want to keep in your paper. But for the purpose of this discussion, let's talk about what would make a binding contract. So have you guys all taken contract law yet? Okay. So in contract law, there's two main things. You have to be an offer and there has to be acceptance. Okay. So that would be the rule, or sorry, I realized I didn't add an extra slide for that. So the rule would be offer and acceptance. How would you apply offer and acceptance in this situation? Like, what would be the questions that you would be looking for cases or types of cases that you would look for to support this?
There was an offer and acceptance, because they talked about starting a business and created a plan.
So it could either be written or it could be verbal?
Correct.
Yeah.
So what we would then look for, and I don't expect you guys to start pulling out actual cases, but we would look for a case that actually just supports that. So it could be a case, it could be legislation, and there are cases that supports that you can have a binding contract that is oral. They don't have to be written. What would be something that we could use to argue the opposite, though? And again, I'm not expecting cases. It could be concepts now. So we're making up rules that are common sense at this point.
In the second scenario, we can say like a sort of there was no consultation between the both partners, and so it was a bit breach of the oral agreement or whatever. So consent, or like they acted they acted without an authority, or
again, correct. So this person acted without an authority. Another thing that I would also point out, and this is again something important not to do in assignments and definitely not not to do in exams, is don't read into what is not there. So the facts that I gave, and I purposely made this very, very short, because what I wanted to do was make it so that you had to sort of guess some things, but not too much. So we don't know what the discussion was had. We don't know if they were talking offhand, where they saying, oh, well, that's a good idea for a business. Maybe we should start this business. We don't know that Ayana agreed to this business. Maybe it was just a casual discussion that maybe we should start a business. The entire scenario is going to change based on what happens. Because have no information. And some of these questions, I've actually had a question in contract law that had next to no information, like this. It was good in some ways because you can literally say, well, if they did this, this is what applies. And if they don't, this is what applies. But it also means that you have to sort of play the devil's advocate to some degree, but you want to be careful with that. Do not add opinions in, only add in legal facts. And it is factual that an acceptance of an offer must be communicated to the offerer for there to be a binding contract. We don't know that Ayana actually agreed, formally said, yes, we are going to do that. But we also know that acceptance can be implied from the conduct of the party. So something that Ayana could have done could have given Elsa the belief that there was actually conduct there. So again, this is all applying the different rules of offer and acceptance, and it shows that you truly understand what offer and acceptance is. You're not just saying, well, Elsa and Ayana, if there was an offer and there was an acceptance, then there is a binding contract. That doesn't show that you understand what offer and acceptance is, because it's very, very wide and broad. So you want to sit down and say, you know, break it down to this is what it is. There cannot be an acceptance if the offeree is unaware of an offer, for example. If Elsa went away and came up with some extra plans and bought these supplies, Ayana was not made aware of this additional part to this contract at all. So again, probably not, but it's all going to come down to who can argue it best. Let's be realistic. That's what the law is about in court. Who's going to argue this best? And in class, you are arguing your position. You're going to be the lawyer. Only in this situation, unless they specifically say you are writing a memo for Ayana or you are writing a memo for Elsa, you need to just present both sides of the argument. So do you see where understanding what they're asking for you saves you a bit of trouble? If they're asking you for Ayana or Elsa to present their side, you still do it that way. But at the same time, you're focusing more on your client. But you do want to make your client aware of the counter arguments. Does that make sense? All right. And then the conclusion would be whatever you conclude based on this discussion here. So we may say, if there's some extra facts, or just basically with this, that unless Elsa can prove that Ayana agreed to this contract and that what they discussed constituted a binding contract, then Ayana is under no legal obligation to pay for half of those supplies. Alternatively, if what they did discuss does constitute a binding contract, then Elsa may be held liable to pay half. Ayana may be held liable to pay the other half. So that would be coming to a conclusion. You can decide which one you would choose based on the evidence that you have there. Hopefully they give you a bit more information than I gave, but I needed the conversation to happen. All right, so now we're going to put it all together, at least this beginning part. So you're going to want to do the research. Cases, legislation, those are the best things that you can utilize. They're at the top of the list. Law databases, journal articles, textbooks, those are secondary sources. Now, there's actually a legal research class. Now, can you guys let me know if you can see what's popping onto my screen now?
Do the research?
No.
The library guides?
Yes. Okay. Good. I wasn't sure if it would switch from the screen to the screen. So perfect. Let me just move this out of the way. So this is actually on the Bachelor of Laws homepage. We have legal research classes, and I think that they're very not useless, sorry. They're very useful. I've actually done them twice now. I particularly like the Finding Case Law, and they're well worth taking the class, because it helps you locate primary legal sources using the databases that we have access to. There's also another one for finding legislation, finding secondary sources, and this one is really important, AGLC. We're gonna go over some AGLC here now, but there is no way that I could give you an entire class on AGLC that would do justice. They do a great job with that AGLC referencing. What I will do, and this is what I'm going to start doing now, is actually show you some resources. So there's a lot of stuff that are outside of, that are either on the website or outside of the school that are that I found very helpful, that are often not talked about. So let me just move back out of here. All right. We'll just go over quickly writing the assignment before I go into AGLC. So you'll want to follow the assignments, use the grading templates. Planning, definitely very helpful. Planning is helpful in exams as well, even though you don't have very much time. There are a lot of people who just start writing and then realize halfway through that they started answering the questions incorrectly, or they think another train of thought hits. It's worth giving yourself a few minutes to read, understand the question, and plan a little bit. And that could be dot points, however you want to do it, just a few words. That is very helpful to answering these exam questions. And the same thing with your assignment. Planning is very helpful. Use any templates that the assignment instructs you to use. Some professors will actually give you a template. Usually with the memos and things like that, they'll give you a template that they expect you to use, and that's very helpful. You also want to include your name, student number, and the assignment name on the first page as sort of a cover letter. Also make sure that you save the file name properly, like your name, student ID, and research assignment. That way, if anything happens, they can figure out where it is. Avoid fancy fonts or page borders. It seems silly to say that, but some people do actually try to fancy their assignments up. Don't do that. Use just something simple. Most lecturers, they recommend Times New Roman size 12 and a line spacing of at least 1.5. And for subheadings and headings, use the AGLC rule 1.12 as a guide. Headings and subheadings are excellent, and it's one of my favorite things about law. It's almost an outline in and of itself if you treat it the right way. I usually do my headings before I even start my paper, and I use that as a guide for what I want to write. Now, let me go into the AGLC. I'm just going to end this PowerPoint because at this point, we're just using the AGLC from the school.
How we differentiate between the headings? It's a bit confusing, this 1.12.
Okay, so with the headings, you usually start with an introduction, and then you would put the headings based on what it is that you're wanting to discuss in your paper. I can actually show you, give me one moment. So the library provided a sample document just to roughly show what AGLC should look like. Okay. So your headings basically outline what it is that you're writing about. So this, for example, would be your introduction. And that's where you're writing your introduction. And you might start with a certain part of your paper. You see here where these are smaller. So this might be a subheading. So if you have a topic that you want to discuss, if we're talking about offer an agreement, using the example that we were discussing, so you might want to put offer an agreement here. And then you might want to talk about different cases related to offer an agreement. So oral agreements as offer an agreement. The elements of a valid contract could be another heading that you can put on. They're pretty flexible how you do these headings. I am a huge fan of reading sample answers from books. There's tons of books out there from LexisNexis where they provide different areas of law. They provide questions and answers. The series is called Q&A. So before I get into any class, I tend to purchase those Q&As and read through the sample answers. And there is no standard in terms of how they do those headings. Sometimes it's very, very dot point, and then sometimes it's just different. Each heading is something completely different that they're talking about. It depends on what the question asks for you. With the problem questions, I tend to put each issue as its own heading. So that would be one issue. If it's multiple issues in a problem, I'm going to do an entire heading for that. And then the sub issues that I establish underneath there, because sometimes one issue can have multiple rules that need to apply to it. So that I might use as a subheading. You're going to find that there's going to be different ways that you apply those headings. But if you create an outline, your outline can become your headings. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but like the main heading, I think we need to use that in the middle. And if we use that, like I say, application or issues on the side, on the left-hand side, is that correct, or still that needs to be in the middle?
It has
Like
to
a
be,
main heading.
it has to be in the middle. So AGLC is
Yeah.
the pedantic thing I've ever seen in my life. They have some rules that they have, and being in the middle is important. Also, how you put the capital Roman numeral next to it as well. But you can find all of that in the AGLC, and I'll go back here. So there's actually an AGL checklist. This is on the library guides here, and it's very helpful again, because one, it gives you the 4th edition, so you can actually find it here, the PDF version of it. And then you can go through here for the checklist down here, which is very helpful, because after you finish your paper, if you go through this checklist, I have never gotten less than perfect marks on my AGLC purely because of this checklist. Because if you sit down when you're done writing and you go through this checklist, I have yet to see a professor say anything was wrong with it. So give yourself some time for that. With the exam, they care very little about referencing in exams. I mean, they still care. You're not gonna, plagiarize, but it's more important than the assignment, because it's actually a part of the grading rubric that they have a section. And you can sometimes get an easy 5 points on just AGLC. I've had assignments where I've had 85, or it would be 75, for example. I would be a distinction, but it's been moved up to a high distinction because of that AGLC. So a quick win is AGLC. Now, how you lay them out here is all on this website here. So you have your books, and this is how you would lay out the books and the different rules. Another thing that I find is helpful, don't wait until the last minute to do your referencing. As I get a source, even if I don't necessarily use the source, it takes a minute or two to create a citation for it, and just stick it on another page. Open up another document, and put in that other document anything that you touch. So if you're reading something, create a quick citation. And then the easiest way to keep track of your citations after that is, if you do decide to use it and you see a paragraph that you like, take note of the page, and underneath that particular citation, just jot down the note. So if you are, say, about to take the details required in order are blah, 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 and this is on page 7, just underneath there, just type in P7 and just a brief summary of that particular thing. So now you have your citation set for later on. But then this is while I'm doing my research, because it can be quite difficult. Now, if we do have some time, I'll show you a high-tech way of keeping track of your citations. Very useful. I wish I had have known this my first few classes, but it is a little bit high-tech, and you need to have either an iPad or a tablet, or you can use it on computer. Anyway, I digress. So what you want to do is look at the different types of referencing for the different types of sources. So when you're having a book, you want to put down the author first. If there's multiple authors, you put it like this. But if there's more than 3, you would put, instead of this entire thing, it would be something like Andrew Clark et al. And that's listed down here. None of this is stuff that you have to guess. It is all there for you. Do not try and remember AGLC off the top of your head. Just don't. Use the resources that you have for you. And again, if you're doing it as you are researching, it becomes less of an overwhelming task. I've done study groups where people will be last minute going through their assignment, trying to figure out where they got this information from. Like they'll put the footnote indicator, the number, but not actually write the footnote down and say, I'll do my footnotes later. And then at the end, they're going through every document that they have, trying to figure out where they found this from. And it's easy to think that professors don't check, but some of them do. I had a professor, Daryl Saunders, that actually did check. because he was shocked that I used a particular reference, and he wanted to double check that I had actually read what I read, and he did. So yeah, do not skimp on this one, because if they catch you, not only can you lose those easy points, but also it can be plagiarism. And as lawyers, we have to go through a character reference when we finish school. And plagiarism is something that could be problematic when you do that. So it's just really not worth it. Take the time to do the referencing, but do it as you go along. It can be quite annoying, but if you're doing it a little bit at a time, it's not a problem at all. Okay. Again, here's the list for the journal article. It explains how to go through the journal article. It has for newspapers, internet materials, case law, legislation. This one has research papers, discussion papers, thesis, conference papers, or similar. Parliamentary material. Legal encyclopedias. Repeated citations. So there is rules around if you have a citation that you use multiple times. And this is again good where if you've already created that citation, as you use it more and more and more throughout your paper, you're not going to have to rewrite that entire citation or copy and paste it. At some point, you're just putting a pinpoint reference, which is this here. So let's open up that. Do you see here? Why does this look so weird? Okay, I don't think this is actually the best resource for that. I have another resource for these pinpoint references. I tried to stick with VU stuff, but that's actually kind of confusing the way that they've done that. So I'll pull that out when we're done with that, and I will add that to the thing, because you used to put above in. So AGLC has actually changed. Usually, once you use it already, you just put the name of the person and then the number, like the page number that you found it in, and then where that person was ahead of time. So I did not realize they actually did this. You can see it right here. Can you see this here? Is this big enough?
Can you enlarge it, zoom in a bit?
Yeah, let me see. Good. Where did it go?
Perfect.
Here we go. This is what it actually looks like. I'm not quite sure, and I'll bring that up with the library because that's a little bit confusing for their pinpoint reference, but this is what it looks like. So if you already use Macmillan in the first, this is what this is saying that, so this is Macmillan, something Macmillan, in one would be the first, and I wonder if they actually did it that way here. There you go. So you use it as the first reference. Catherine Macmillan, Mistakes in Contract Law, 83, and then you used it again down here. So if you've done your reference in the first instance as you're starting, when you use that reference again, all you have to do is put the last name of the author in the very first time you used it, and then you can stop there if it's the same page. But if it's another page, then you add the page number of where you got that from. And that's all that you have to do. So if you've done that first, when you first pull up that book or legislation or journal article, if you do that in the first instance, everything else is just pretty simple going forward. Now, there's a few small things that I've gotten dinged for in a previous school that I don't think VU does, but I'll point it out as well. Full stops at the end of your citations, put them in, because some people are very serious about those. I strongly suggest that you just follow the rules. Again, some people will say that it's not important, they don't check. I would rather put a full stop in and get my full marks than not put the full stop in and not get my full marks. Easy win, might as well. So just do that. We've done the repeated citations. Are you guys comfortable with quotes? Like what you should be doing with regards to quotes, like when you should put it in quotation marks or when you should separate it out into its own long quote? Okay, then we will not be going over those. Okay, I think that covers everything that I wanted to, oh no, there was one other thing, sorry.
I just need to ask in the exam, if we are quoting something, what about providing a reference? Is that still necessary, or we need to paraphrase, or like how we quote something like?
So in exams, when you're quoting, you still quote and you still reference, but it's not as stringent. So they're not looking for you to put the full stops in every little nuance of AGLC in exams, because I guess they're aware that it takes time. So what they're looking for is that you might reference, it might be in a parentheses is what I've done in exams. I usually will put parentheses. I don't put pages in exams either. I don't put full cases, for example. I might put a few words to point out the case. So if we were talking about contract law, again, carbolic, there's a Carhill v. carbolic smoke ball one. I'm not going to write that entire thing. I might put Carhill v. carbolic smoke or R.V. Clark. I'm not going to put the entire case in an exam. Whereas with an assignment, you want to put everything in there. So if it's in the AGLC, put it in. In an exam, you have a limited amount of time, and they know that. And if you look at the exam questions, often the exam questions are not very different from assignment questions. The only difference is that you have a shorter amount of time to do it in. So they understand that. What I wanted to share, and I found this on our website as well for free. So one of the biggest resources that I use is a book called Mastering Law Studies and Exam Techniques. Now, I actually have the physical book here, and I've been using it. I started my law degree in 2015 and took some time off. I have very good grades, and I attribute my grades, like every time somebody asks me, how do I keep my grades as high as I do? I point out this particular book. I've had 2 different versions of it, and I plan on getting the new one that comes out in October, but it's not necessary to get it. It's just my personal Bible. And I thought that I would share that because a lot of times in school in general, and I've gone to 2 different law schools now, what I find is that there is an assumption that we understand certain things. The lecturers are there to teach their particular content. They're not often there to teach foundation. So they may say something and expect you to understand. And they don't sit down and break it down. They don't explain to you what they mean. They say, this is how you should do. This book is really good in doing that. And since it's free, it doesn't hurt to have a look at it. But they talk about different things in the book, like preparing for exams, how to organize your notes. This book is why my notes are the way they are. And since we do have a bit of time, I'll actually show you some of my notes as well and how I organize my notes. Because of this particular book. It's very good, it's very useful. It teaches you how to summarize cases as well. And one of the best things about the summaries of the cases is that once you have a summary of a case in an exam, it makes it a lot easier to pull the relevant things into that exam, because again, you have a very small amount of time in an exam to do this. So it breaks down things like summarizing your cases, organizing your notes, how to study correctly, because there is a technique to studying. I used to just think that I would sit down and keep reading it over and over and over again. And the more I read it, the more it would stick into my head. And that's, again, not the case. Let me just open up an example of notes. One moment. Now, this resource that I'm going to share is actually a free resource for all uni students. It's usually paid, but as long as you're a university student, you have access to it at no charge. It's called Notion, and it's meant to be an organizer. And what it does is a lot of people use it as a planner. Businesses use it for enterprise things. I use it for a lot of different things. But this is what my notes look like. Okay. Now, let me find one that is really good. Alternative dispute resolution. So I essentially separate everything into weeks, sessions, and then keep it separate. But before exams, when the exam comes, I do bring it together. But what's important about this particular method of studying is that it allows you to think before you read. So can you guys see clearly? Can you see?
It's a bit small.
Let me open it on a normal, because you can open this either on the app, which is what I had, but I'll open it up in a website so that it can be zoomed in and see if it's bigger. Yep, this is better. Is this good?
Perfect.
Okay. So this particular program, it allows you to move your notes around, but it also allows you to format them in a way that forces you to think before you actually answer. So when you're reading a textbook, all the information is in front of you. You don't have to think because you're reading. With this one, you're active learning. So how do individuals respond to conflict, for example? Now I have emotional response there, but I can choose whether I expand this to give me the answers, or I can keep it closed and test myself. Usually what I'll do before I open this is see how many of these that I can do, and then I'll open it up to see how what I thought matches with this. It also allows you to organize things like different links. So this right here is a link to a document. How do people react to conflict? Which I can then open into another link. So you're not just using your textbook, you're not just using any one document, you're bringing all the different things that they give you together into one space as you're studying. You can include photos, you can include videos, you can highlight, you can add things that are important, you can include sources. Another thing is that, I don't know about you guys, but have you ever seen a whole block of text and just get overwhelmed because it's just too much at one time? Yeah, Carly. It's really helpful because it allows you to break down that block of text. Instead of being confronted with all this at once, you can break it down in a way that you can utilize it. And so throughout the course, you're slowly creating your own study database, so that by the time the actual exam happens, and in the process of creating this database, you're reinforcing that information. You're typing things out, you're copying, you're pasting, you're looking at things, you're rearranging them. It starts to get stuck into your head. And the more you do this, the easier it becomes. Does that make sense?
Yes. What's this called again?
Notion.
Notion.
And there's all kinds of free templates that you can use. This one that I'm using is called a Cornell template. I'm happy to share. I can create a blank one of these to share with the way that I use it, because this is years of me creating this, but all of my
Yes,
credits are listed in this thing here. And every single one has its own section, as you can see. But I'm happy to share these sorts of things, because what I find is that I have a disability, and I've spoken about this before. Because I have a disability, I cannot type for as long as other people. I also cannot write for as long as other people. I have
got
to,
the same issue.
huh?
I got the same issue.
Then this will be perfect for you.
Yeah.
A lot of times we focus on traditional ways of learning and traditional ways of studying because that's what we've always known. And that's why I stopped going to school in 2015, because I just thought that I simply could not do it. My brain was fine, but my body was not cooperating. It wasn't until I started looking into alternative ways that I realized that studying does not have to be sitting there reading a book for hours or writing on pencil. If you have, say, a Mac computer or a computer with voice dictation, this can actually read out to you. So it'll read out loud to you. If you cannot type a lot, it will actually, you can use voice to talk, which I can turn on to show you specifically. Oh wait, I don't have it turned on. If I want to, what I can do is I can actually start speaking. And as I'm speaking, and if you guys, do you want to see this? Like, or is this going too much?
I'm fine with you showing us. I'm learning a lot.
I'll turn it on. And this can also be useful if you're just tired. Honestly, I know a lot of us work on computers a lot, and it can sometimes get tiring. Okay. All right, I need you guys to be quiet or else it's going to start typing everything that you say. Testing. Oh, there we go. All right. The subject of dispute. Testing. Groot. See? I'm not going to go into it too much because the voice commands that I have are very silly. Like, for example, going to the next line is Groot, because I was watching I Am Groot earlier than that. So it won't make any sense when I start randomly throwing Marvel characters. But what I've basically done is now that's a way that someone who has limited mobility, or if you get tired, or sometimes you just really don't want to type a ton of stuff, that's a way that you can get your notes down. And by speaking them, that's again a way of reinforcing the knowledge. It doesn't matter whether you read it, write it, it's still reinforcing speaking it. So don't sit down and think that because you can't write. Also, if you have trouble writing a lot and you have a physical issue, speak to the disability team at the school, because there's accommodations that they can use for you. It's not cheating.
I recently registered with them and got appointed with them tomorrow. So
If you ever want to reach out to me, because this is like the space where I really, I love talking about tech. There's a lot of different things that I use outside of this. This is just one that's easily accessible, and there's very little learning curve to Notion. If you can type or you can speak, you can use Notion and you create what you want from it. There's other ones that are a little bit more stringent and that they require specific things. Yes, Carly, I actually can print these pages from this platform. I print them as PDFs. What you'll want to do before you print it though is open up all of those particular drop-down menus so that you can print them out. So yeah, you can do that. You can also export them in different ways. So you can export them as like one big PDF. That's usually something that I do a few days before. And alternatively, because VU is a lot, it's very, very quick with the block method, I often will finish a week, and at the end of the week when I do my revision on Sunday, print out the week's worth of notes so that I have them. And that's only if I'm comfortable with them. There are some classes, like when we had contract law, I didn't print those out until right before the exam because everything just kept changing. Every time I learned something new, I would go back. Another thing that's useful for this particular app is that you can link things. So you ever have like a class will mention something that pertained to week 1, for example, but you don't want to go back, flip back and write the note down. You can actually link page from week 1 to week 3 and just link it. So I can show you quickly how you would do that. If I click this, for example, and I say link this concept, I can link it to week 1 session. There we go. I can link it to week 1 session 3 notes very easily. So that link is there for me. Because again, these things are not always linear. I felt like in contract law, they bounced around back and forth a lot. The same thing with torts. They kept bouncing around. Like with negligence, we would leave it and then come back to negligence later on and something later on about negligence. So I just kept linking things back. Negligence had its own page, and I had several links back to negligence so that if I needed to go back, I could. Ideally, it would be awesome if they allowed us to just use this daggone thing in exams, because it's your information and you're technically not cheating, but they still want paper, so printing out is best. This is more useful in terms of the links and things like that when you're studying. But if you're doing it actively throughout the block, when it comes down to the exams, it's almost just regurgitating stuff that you've already remembered. Your paper is just for recall, because at the point that you've done this, it's pretty much in your head. Other exam tips that I have is definitely read the material ahead of time if you can. I know that open books can be tricky because sometimes people think that it's an open book. If I need the information, I can look in my book. But if you don't know where to find it in your book, you're wasting time in your exam trying to find something because you didn't read it in the first place. You don't know where to find it. Reading things, taking notes, noting where pages are in your book. Having a good set of comprehensive notes save you from flipping through the textbooks. I very rarely touch a textbook when it comes down to the exams. And the reason being is because my notes are comprehensive enough. Occasionally I'll open it up if I want to clarify a case, or if there's something else that maybe they've thrown me for a loop in the exam question. So making sure that you're prepared for the exam is really helpful. But again, reading through that Mastering Law Studies and Law Exam technique, it's free, is very, they just give you all the information. That feels to me like cheating. It's a professor, the person who wrote it is actually a professor who writes exams. And he's basically given you a cheat sheet. He's basically hacked exams and said, this is what you need to do to pass these exams. And it hasn't failed me yet. Any other questions or concerns?
Yeah,
There
hey
is a
Alison,
question
sorry.
in- oh,
Yep, I might have missed it earlier, but is Notion an app?
Notion's a web app, but it's also a separate app. So as a student, if you sign up with your VU website, you actually get the full free. So you get access to all the linking and things like that. You don't have to pay for it until you graduate. And I think it's like a 4-year thing. It's not expensive in general. I'd still pay for it if I didn't have it for free, but it is free to students. The last bit of information that I will give you about Notion is Notion can be a little bit overwhelming if you spend too much time trying to make it pretty. Don't. During your free time, definitely have fun with it, make it pretty, make it your own. But when you're doing your schoolwork, just get it down, get your ideas out. Also, do not pay for templates at all because there's so many free templates out there. They are so many free templates out there. When I first started with Notion, I was so enamored by it that I just kept buying everything. And then I realized afterwards that not only were they free templates, but you would change so much that it becomes your own template. So don't worry about that. There's another app that's good for, since we have another 15 minutes, called Margin Note, that's good for assessments. This is paid, but it's not a lot. And this will tend to be more helpful when you get to the higher levels. This is a PDF. I'm going to use one of my old school ones because then I'm technically not cheating. This right here just basically puts together all of your PDFs. So have you ever started writing an assessment and you're downloading journal articles and you have like 10 different journal articles, they're all different PDFs and you're getting information from different places? With this particular one, you can highlight something and that highlight becomes a mind map. And you can find exactly where. Now, this is hard to see on a good day. So I'm going to see if I can make this bigger at all. Okay, This is going to be a little hard because I use it on my tablet mostly, and you can zoom in on the tablet, but you can't. Say this is law and indigenous rights. So this right here, this little topic right here is law and indigenous rights. And I want to add on to it, or wait, I'm going to try and pull this out. Here we go. So this entire mind map right here, this piece here, is about liberal foundations. And then I click here, and I know exactly where every single bit comes from. And this is multiple. This one has 36 different documents. So you can use as many documents as you want, as long as they're PDFs. You can also use Windows documents, or sorry, Word documents, and you can pull in documents like Wikipedia, for example. Wikipedia is not a source, by the way. Wikipedia is not a good source to use. Please do not cite that. But Wikipedia, I find, is really, really awesome for giving you that high level understanding. Sometimes concepts can be a little bit confusing. Going to places like Wikipedia, going to even newspaper articles, for example, can be helpful in clarifying your understanding. Do not cite them, but use them to clarify understanding. In any case, this is very helpful when you get to those assignments where they're expecting 15, 20, 30. If you do honors, this is also very useful as well. So these are two apps that I use quite a lot. I also sometimes use them when I'm having trouble writing. I will bring the teacher's PowerPoints into them, because then I can highlight things that I need to go back and do a voice notes for later on without much physical issues as well. So it's also a quick hack. You do not have to have anything that I'm mentioning. You do not have to have a physical issue to use them. I think that accessibility can be if you are time poor, for example, if you are somebody that wants to listen to the lecture and then deal with things afterwards, because I know some people struggle with writing and listening to the lecture. They lose a lot if they're doing both. So that's another good way of doing that. You can highlight things, jot down quick notes, and then go back and do building out your notes later on. And sorry, Joseph, if you have a MacBook, yeah, it's a native app as well on the MacBook. You can just get it on the Apple Store. Okay, any other questions or concerns? Okay, I think that we're good to go. If there's nothing else.
If there's nothing else, firstly, I just wanted to say thank you, Alison. Tonight has been amazing. I've learned things that I never knew in the last 3 years of being a law student. Definitely going to be using Notion. It's going to be my new best friend.
I am a fan of Notion. My friends call me the Notion prophet, because about Notion, like some people talk about their religion, but I really am a firm in it. It's amazing.
Definitely. I can't wait to start using it. But does anyone have any questions or anything they'd like to say before we end the session?
Actually, I've requested for this special examination. This is my first unit, and I'm not sure like how that. I just need a bit extra time for my exam, and I got appointment with accessibility service tomorrow, and I got exam on Wednesday, so I'm not sure about that. So if yeah.
Be clear about what it is that you need with them, because
Yeah.
they're going to suggest things. It's up to you to suggest what you need. If you need extra time for writing, that's actually pretty much a standard adaptation. I have extra time as well because I do mine by voice. I will speak most of my exam answers and use my hands for formatting and things like that. They also have access to software and things like that if you need it, that can help you. If you need to use like a voice to text, for example, you can utilize that software during an exam if that's what you need. But the most important thing is to be very clear about what it is you need, and with no shame. If you need extra time, you need extra time. It's not any sort of mental issue. It's purely because you can't physically get out as much information in the time that other people would be able to do so.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to help in any way that I can.
What's your email or what's your contact?
I will give you,
Okay.
should I give him the education one, or I can give him my personal one? It doesn't matter to me.
Yeah, please give him the education one. And also, Alison, can you confirm that everyone who registered will get a copy of your PowerPoint? And
Yes, so I'm gonna add some, I didn't get a chance to add the alternative text. So if someone's using a screen reader, they can do it. That I will be doing. They will be able to get a copy of it, I would say within 48 hours. So there is some images there that wouldn't be able to be read.
And the same applies for the recording. So you'll be able to watch the recording again within, so when Alison sends her email, she'll send it with the link to the recording. So we'll say, yeah, 48 hours.
Not a problem. And I cannot remember the email address.
So it's education. Joseph, can you type it in the chat? education@dictumsocietyvu.com.
Thank you for that, Joseph. I have one too many emails.
Okay. But if no one has any further questions, I don't think Joseph is here right now. But yes, if no one has any questions, I'd like to take a photo just for tonight's session, more of a memory. And it will also be posted on our social media platforms. Oh, he's on. So yes, if you'd like to be in the photo, if you could turn on your camera. And Alison, are you able to stop sharing your screen?
Yep, I'm just doing that now.
Oh, it's only 4 of us. Carly's disappeared.
She said she was called for dinner.
Okay. Oh, hang on. Sorry, I'm in the hospital, so I have to wear a mask. But yeah. So 3, 2, 1. Ooh, smile. Cool. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Chef Cat.